The sun had already dipped behind the mountains when Rachel made her way through the dimly lit streets. It was supposed to be just another evening, an uneventful walk home after work. But as the shadows grew longer, an unsettling feeling crept up her spine. Her instinct screamed that something was off. She quickened her pace, the sound of her footsteps echoing off the empty walls. Then, a figure emerged from a nearby alley. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, appeared as though he had been waiting for her. "Hey, you dropped this," he said, holding up a small, crumpled piece of paper. Rachel hesitated, her pulse quickening. There was something in his eyes, something that didn't sit right. "Thanks," she said, forcing a smile. But as she tried to pass by, his hand shot out, blocking her way. "Where are you headed?" His voice was too smooth, too practiced. Rachel's heart raced. This wasn't just a casual encounter. She was in danger. Rachel's mind raced, weighing her options. She could turn and run, but the man would easily catch her. No, she needed to think. There was no one around, no one to help her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She smiled politely. "I'm just headed home, thanks for the paper." But the man's grip on her arm tightened, and she felt a surge of panic. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice now low and menacing. Rachel's heart hammered in her chest. She had no choice now. Thinking quickly, she tugged at his arm with all her strength, catching him off guard. In that split second of distraction, she broke free and bolted down the alley, her adrenaline propelling her forward. But the man wasn't far behind. She could hear his heavy footsteps echoing in pursuit. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she sprinted through the alley, her feet pounding against the concrete. She could hear the man gaining on her, his footsteps growing louder, closer. Every corner she turned, every shadow she passed, seemed to offer no escape. Her legs burned, but she pushed herself harder. Suddenly, she heard a car engine rev, the headlights blinding her as she stumbled toward the street. Desperation hit her. There had to be a way out. She ran into the street, her heart leaping as she saw headlights coming toward her. She waved her arms frantically. "Help! Please help!" she screamed. The car screeched to a halt and the driver's window rolled down. But it wasn't a savior waiting for her. It was the same man, his cold eyes staring at her from behind the wheel. Rachel froze, her heart sinking into her stomach. She had run into his trap. The car door swung open, and the man stepped out, his hands raised in mock surrender. "You should have just stayed quiet," he said, his voice dripping with malice. Fear gripped Rachel, but she refused to give in. There had to be something she could do. She glanced around, her eyes searching for any chance of escape. Suddenly a shout broke the stillness of the night. "Hey!" A figure appeared at the end of the street, another man, running toward them. The would-be killer's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing. Without thinking, Rachel turned and sprinted in the opposite direction, hoping against hope that someone would save her. Rachel's legs were on fire as she ran, her breath shallow and desperate. She could hear the man cursing behind her, the sound of his footsteps pounding against the pavement. The stranger who had shouted earlier was still far behind, but Rachel could feel hope stirring inside her. She reached the end of the street, her eyes scanning for any signs of help. But all she saw were closed doors and darkened windows. Panic surged within her. Just as she was about to give up, she spotted something. A door slightly ajar, a flicker of light from within. Without hesitation, she ran for it. She slammed her shoulder against the door, her heart pounding. It creaked open, and she stumbled inside, falling into the darkness. Rachel collapsed inside, gasping for breath, her heart racing. The door slammed shut behind her with a heavy thud. She glanced around. It was an abandoned building, dirty, cold, and eerily silent. But at least it was a hiding place, a temporary refuge from the killer. She took a moment to gather herself, but her sense of relief was short-lived. There was a faint sound coming from the darkness, footsteps. "Where are you?" a voice called, his voice muffled and angry. Rachel's eyes widened. The killer had followed her. She had no time to think, no time to plan. She needed to move, and fast. The footsteps grew louder, reverberating through the empty building like a drumbeat of doom. Rachel's heart hammered in her chest as she crouched lower, her back pressed against the cold wall. She held her breath, praying he hadn't heard her. Come out, wherever you are." The killer's voice rang through the silence. His voice was twisted, mocking. Rachel's pulse quickened. She couldn't let him find her. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for any possible escape route. There was a window, high up, barely visible in the dark. She could climb out, but would she make it in time? Suddenly the door creaked, and a sliver of light broke into the darkness. She froze. The man stepped inside, his silhouette outlined by the dim light from the hallway. Rachel's mind raced. She had to move now. As the man stepped farther into the room, she glanced at the window again. It was her only chance. She stood silently, barely daring to breathe, as he took a few more steps. He was getting closer. Her legs felt like they were made of lead, but she knew she had no choice. With a swift, controlled motion, Rachel darted for the window, climbing the rusted pipes outside the wall. She could feel the sharp sting of the metal against her skin, but the pain was nothing compared to the terror driving her. The man's voice called from behind her. "You can't run forever." Rachel's breath caught in her throat, but she pushed herself harder, the window just inches away. She reached it and pushed it open with all her strength. Rachel pulled herself up, barely making it through the narrow window. Her foot caught on the frame, and she gasped in pain, but she didn't stop. She had to get out, had to survive. The wind outside bit at her skin, but she didn't care. She could hear the man's angry shouts from behind her, but he was still inside the building. She wasn't safe yet. Her feet hit the ground with a dull thud, and she stumbled forward, nearly falling. She caught her balance and kept running, her legs moving as fast as they could carry her. The street outside was empty, but the killer was still in pursuit. Her eyes darted around for shelter, but there was nothing. Just endless streets and alleyways. Rachel's breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted down the street, her feet pounding the pavement. She couldn't look back. She couldn't afford to stop. But the night was eerily silent, and every shadow seemed to threaten her. The distant sound of sirens made her feel a glimmer of hope, but they were far off. Too far. The man's footsteps echoed behind her again. She had to be getting close to a busy area. There had to be someone, anyone who could help. Suddenly she heard a shout from behind her. "You can't run forever!" Rachel's heart skipped a beat as she realized he was gaining on her. She risked a glance over her shoulder and saw him, a dark figure in the distance, his movements swift and purposeful. Rachel's panic surged as she pushed herself harder, her muscles screaming in protest. She was so close to breaking, but she couldn't afford to slow down. A few more blocks. She just needed a few more blocks. Up ahead, she saw a neon sign flickering, an all-night diner. Relief washed over her. People. Safety. She sprinted toward it, desperate. But just as she neared the door, she heard a sound that froze her in her tracks. The man's voice, close now, as if he were right behind her. "Did you really think you could escape?" Rachel's blood ran cold. She spun around to see him mere feet away, his face twisted in a cruel grin. She was cornered. Rachel's mind spun as she backed toward the diner's door, every instinct telling her to fight, but she was out of options. The killer's face was inches from hers now, his hand reaching for her arm. Before she could react, a voice shouted from the diner. "Hey, what's going on out here?" Rachel's head whipped around. A man, tall and muscular, stepped out from the diner, his expression confused and then quickly turning to concern as he saw the situation unfold. The killer hesitated, his eyes flickering between Rachel and the newcomer. Rachel didn't wait. With all the strength she could muster, she pushed the killer away and bolted into the diner, the door slamming behind her. She collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, safe, at least for now. Rachel lay on the cold tile floor of the diner, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The door was locked behind her, but her mind raced. Could the killer still get inside? She quickly scrambled to her feet, her legs shaky, and glanced around. The diner was nearly empty at this hour, save for a few patrons who hadn't noticed the drama unfolding outside. The man who had come to her rescue stood by the door, eyeing it warily. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice firm but concerned. Rachel nodded, still unable to speak. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She took a deep breath, finally able to speak. He's still out there. He won't stop until he catches me." The man didn't hesitate. "Get to the back. I'll handle this." Her body screamed at her to run, but she followed his instructions, moving quickly toward the back of the diner. Rachel made her way to the back of the diner, her heart still hammering in her chest. She didn't know this man, but something in his eyes reassured her that he meant to help. As she reached the back door, the sounds of muffled voices echoed from the front of the diner. The man was trying to reason with the killer, but Rachel could hear the tension rising with every passing second. Suddenly, the door slammed open. She whipped around, but it wasn't the man who had helped her. It was the killer. His eyes locked onto hers immediately. A cold, calculating gaze. He was in. And worse, he wasn't alone. "Get away from her!" the man shouted, stepping between Rachel and the killer, but the killer merely smirked. "You can't protect her," he growled. "Not from me." The air thickened with tension. Rachel's mind was racing as she watched the standoff unfold before her. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. She needed to act, quickly. The killer's smile twisted into something darker. He wasn't here for a fight, he was here to finish what he had started. With a growl, he lunged at the man in front of Rachel, knocking him back into the counter. Rachel felt a surge of panic. The man was strong, but he was caught off guard. Before Rachel could react, she grabbed a metal chair from the corner and swung it at the killer, aiming for his back. The blow landed with a sickening thud, but it only seemed to enrage him further. "Stay down!" she screamed at the man, but he wasn't listening. The killer was too focused on his prey. Rachel's heart pounded in her ears as she realized that her fight had just begun. The chair crashed into the killer's back, sending him stumbling forward. He grunted in pain but didn't fall. The man who had been protecting Rachel now stood shakily, trying to regain his balance. The killer turned, his eyes narrowing into slits. "You think that's going to stop me?" he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. Rachel's breath came in shallow bursts as she backed away toward the kitchen. She didn't want to leave the man behind, but she had no choice. She couldn't let the killer get close to her again. The sound of breaking glass shattered the tense silence as the killer swung a fist at the man, knocking him back against a table. The man groaned but stayed on his feet. Rachel glanced toward the kitchen. It was now or never. With a deep breath, she dashed toward the back, her legs moving faster than she thought they could. Rachel's heart raced as she reached the back door of the kitchen. She knew she couldn't go out that way. She was just buying herself time, buying them time. Her eyes scanned the kitchen, landing on a large industrial-sized knife on the counter. She grabbed it instinctively, holding it in her shaking hands. She didn't want to hurt anyone, but if it came to it. The door to the kitchen banged open, and Rachel spun around, the knife raised. The man who had been trying to protect her had followed her in. His face was covered in sweat, his eyes wide with desperation. "What are you doing?" The killer was close behind, his shadow looming in the doorway. Rachel had no choice. She backed up, the knife held firmly in her hand. "Stay back," she screamed, her voice filled with raw fear. She could see the killer's dark, twisted grin in the low light, and she knew the game was far from over. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as the killer stepped into the kitchen. He wasn't fazed by the knife, he seemed to relish the fear. He approached slowly, methodically, like a predator closing in on its prey. "Don't make me hurt you," Rachel warned, though her voice shook with uncertainty. The killer's grin widened. "I'm already hurting you," he said, his voice a low, menacing whisper. With one swift move, he lunged at her, his hand grabbing her wrist before she could react. The knife slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. "Please," Rachel pleaded, struggling to break free from his grip. Her mind raced for a way out, but she was trapped. The only way to survive was to keep fighting, keep moving. Just as the killer's grip tightened, a loud crash echoed from behind them. The man had grabbed a pan and thrown it at the killer, distracting him long enough for Rachel to break free. She shoved him backward, but he wasn't done yet. The fight was far from over. Rachel's heart raced as she stumbled backward, her mind desperately searching for an escape. She didn't know how much longer she could keep this up. The killer's grip on her wrist was unyielding, and his eyes burned with malice. The man who had tried to protect her was recovering, standing shakily and holding a chair. His eyes locked with hers. "Run! I'll keep him busy!" But Rachel couldn't. She couldn't leave him behind. The killer let out a low, menacing laugh. "You really think you can get away?" He jerked her forward, forcing her to stumble. Rachel's chest tightened with fear, but her eyes flickered toward the back door again. It was their only hope, but she had to act fast. She twisted in his grasp, using all her strength to break free, and in that instant, she bolted toward the back exit. Rachel's legs burned as she ran, her feet pounding against the pavement. She didn't dare look behind her, but she could hear the killer's footsteps getting closer. He was relentless. She needed to think, needed a plan. The street ahead was empty, the lights dim, casting long shadows across the road. The man who had helped her had followed her outside, and his voice carried over the street. "Hey, get back here." Rachel risked a glance over her shoulder and saw the killer gaining ground. His eyes locked on hers. "You won't escape," he yelled, a twisted smile forming on his lips. Rachel didn't stop. She pushed her body harder, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had to outrun him. She had no other choice. Rachel's eyes darted around the empty street as she ran. She saw a car up ahead, parked near the sidewalk. A sense of hope sparked in her chest. She was so close. But just as she reached the car, she heard the killer's voice behind her. "You're not getting away." The sound of his voice sent chills down her spine, but she couldn't stop. She reached the car, her hands trembling as she tried the door handle. Locked. Die. "No," she whispered in frustration. She heard the man approaching, his steps heavy and sure. Rachel pounded on the window of the car with her fist, hoping to attract attention, but the street remained eerily quiet. Suddenly the killer was there, standing right behind her. His breath was hot against her neck as he growled, "I told you, you can't run forever." Rachel's body tensed as she spun around, facing the killer. She had no more time to waste. She couldn't outrun him. She couldn't outfight him. But there had to be something she could do. Her eyes scanned her surroundings. Nothing but empty streets and darkened houses. But then she noticed something. The car door wasn't locked from the inside. She twisted the handle again and yanked it open, slipping inside just as the killer reached for her. The door slammed shut behind her, and Rachel fumbled with the keys in the ignition, her hands trembling. She could feel the killer's eyes burning into her from outside the window. "Start! Start!" she whispered frantically, the engine sputtering before it roared to life. The engine roared to life, and Rachel slammed her foot on the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, tires screeching as she sped down the empty street. She glanced in the rearview mirror, heart racing, but there was no sign of the killer. He was still behind her, but at least she had gained some distance. Rachel's hands gripped the wheel so tight, her knuckles turned white. She could still feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had to get away, had to get out of here. But she knew it wasn't over. Not yet. The killer wouldn't stop, not until he had her. Rachel could feel his presence lurking behind her, waiting for his next move. And she wasn't sure how much longer she could outrun him. Rachel's hands were slick with sweat as she kept the car speeding down the road. She didn't know how long she had been driving. Her mind was too focused on escaping to track the time. The streets became more familiar, and Rachel realized she was approaching a small park she had passed earlier that day. It was a quiet neighborhood, and the park was empty at this hour. But just as she turned the corner, she saw headlights in the distance. A car was coming toward her, moving fast. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. There was only one way for this to end. She had to keep going. She couldn't stop. Not now. The other car was getting closer. She had seconds to make her move. Her eyes flickered to the side. There was a narrow alley ahead. With one swift motion, she veered off the main road and turned into it, praying she could lose him. The alley was tight, the walls on either side so close Rachel could barely keep the car from scraping against them. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her eyes fixed on the narrow path ahead. Her heart raced, and every bump in the road seemed to jolt her with more fear. She could hear the screeching tires of the killer's car as it followed her into the alley, his headlights blinding her in the rearview mirror. "Come on," Rachel whispered, urging the car to go faster. But the alley seemed to stretch on forever, winding and narrow. She glanced ahead. There was a dead end coming up. She had no choice. With a quick, panicked glance behind her, Rachel swerved sharply to the side, making the car careen toward a small opening between two buildings. She barely made it, her tires skidding on the wet pavement. Rachel's car squealed as it scraped past the buildings, barely fitting through the tight space. Her heart was in her throat, and every fiber of her being screamed at her to stop. But there was no stopping now. She could hear the killer's car revving behind her, the sound of metal grinding against metal as he followed closely. His anger was palpable, the sound of his engine almost deafening. The alley ahead opened up to a wider street, but Rachel knew it wouldn't be enough. The killer was too close. She could feel the heat of his pursuit, a constant reminder that she couldn't let up for a second. As she approached the end of the alley, she saw the street ahead, a brief glimmer of hope. But the moment she came into the open, the killer would be on her. It was only a matter of time before he caught up. The street ahead was coming into view, but Rachel didn't have much time. Her mind raced, trying to think of something, anything, that would help her escape. As she hit the open road, she slammed the car into higher gear, the engine roaring with power. But it wasn't enough. She could hear the killer's engine right behind her, the sound of his car getting closer. Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted a large dumpster on the sidewalk, positioned near a sharp turn. A plan started to form in her mind. She didn't have much of a choice. She needed to act fast. Without thinking, she swerved the car toward the dumpster, hoping she could block the killer's path and buy herself a few more seconds. With a sharp, breathless maneuver, Rachel slammed the car to the side, just missing the dumpster, but not the killer's car. The impact sent both vehicles screeching to a halt. The crash echoed in the night, and for a split second, everything went silent. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest, and her breath caught in her throat. She watched as the killer's car spun out of control, the tires screeching as it veered off course. But he wasn't done. The killer's car slammed into the curb, bouncing to a stop, and the doors flew open. He stepped out, rage burning in his eyes as he glared at Rachel's car. She didn't wait for him to approach. She slammed the car into reverse, her foot pressing the gas pedal, and she sped backward toward an intersection a few blocks away. The killer was still coming after her, but now he was angry. And when the killer was angry, Rachel knew there was no more running. She had to be smart. She had to think. Her hands gripped the wheel harder as she prepared to make her next move. Rachel's mind raced. She had one more chance, one more plan. The streets around her were growing more familiar, and she realized she was closing in on the city's outskirts. The roads were quieter now, and there were fewer places to hide. She could see a small bridge ahead, a bridge that crossed over a fast-moving river. It was risky, but it might be the only way to lose him. Rachel's foot pressed harder on the accelerator, the car speeding toward the bridge. She had to time this perfectly. As she neared the entrance to the bridge, she heard the killer's car screeching behind her. She wasn't fast enough. He was too close. With seconds to spare, Rachel swerved the car toward the side, heading straight for the edge of the bridge. The tires skidded against the wet pavement, and the car lurched, but she held on, her eyes focused on the fast-moving water below. Rachel's heart raced as she pushed the car harder, heading straight toward the bridge's edge. The killer's car was right behind her. He wasn't giving up. She didn't know what came over her. She could feel the adrenaline surging through her veins, her mind focused and sharp. She made the final decision in a split second. Whoa! At the last moment, she jerked the steering wheel hard to the right, sending the car spinning. The tires screeched as she swerved off the road and into the guardrail. The car tilted, teetering dangerously at the edge of the bridge, and Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She had one moment to act before the car tipped over the edge into the water below. Her heart raced as she scrambled to unbuckle her seatbelt. The sound of the killer's footsteps echoed in the distance. He was getting closer. Rachel's hands shook as she finally unbuckled her seatbelt, the panic overwhelming her. The car teetered dangerously at the edge of the bridge, and with one wrong move, she could plunge into the fast-moving water below. She couldn't waste any more time. Her mind was clouded, but she could hear the killer's footsteps nearing. The door was still stuck, but she pulled at the handle with all her strength. It wouldn't budge. The car shifted again, leaning precariously toward the edge. The sound of metal scraping against concrete filled the air. She had to get out now. Her heart pounded in her chest as she kicked the window with her heel. The glass shattered with a sharp crack. With one last breath, Rachel climbed out through the broken window, her hands slipping as she reached for the bridge's support column. She clung on, her fingers numb, and her body trembling from the strain. Rachel's heart pounded as she swung herself onto the bridge's support, her body fighting the pull of gravity. She could feel her muscles screaming in protest, but there was no time to stop. Behind her, she heard the killer's voice, low and mocking. "You think you can escape me?" Rachel's breath caught as she scrambled up the column, her hands raw from the jagged edges of the stone. Every second felt like an eternity. She had no idea how long she could hold on, but she knew she couldn't stay here. The killer was getting closer, and if he caught her now, there was no chance of survival. Just as she reached the top of the bridge, she heard the unmistakable screech of tires. The killer's car was pulling up behind her, the sound of his engine vibrating through the air. She had to run. Rachel reached the top of the bridge, her feet barely finding a foothold as she climbed over the railing. She took a deep breath, her body shaking violently. The streets below were too far to jump, and the water was rushing dangerously beneath her. There was no turning back now. The killer was almost at the base of the bridge, his voice yelling up at her in frustration. Rachel glanced toward the far side of the bridge and saw a narrow path leading into the woods. It was her only chance. Without thinking, she made her way across the bridge to the other side, her legs trembling with exhaustion. The killer was still shouting, but she didn't care. She had to keep moving. As she reached the path, the cold night air wrapped around her like a blanket, and she ducked into the forest, hoping to lose him among the trees. The woods were thick, the trees towering over her as Rachel pushed through the underbrush. She could barely see where she was going, but she didn't care. She had to lose him now. Behind her, the killer's footsteps crunched through the fallen leaves. She could hear him getting closer. He was relentless, and the closer he got, the more desperate Rachel became. She stumbled over a fallen branch, falling to her knees. Her chest heaved as she gasped for breath, the cold air burning her lungs. She could hear the killer's voice growing louder, his words twisted with anger. "You can't outrun me." Rachel gritted her teeth and pushed herself to her feet. There was no time to stop. She couldn't slow down, not now. Her mind raced, and suddenly, a flash of light caught her eye. Rachel's eyes darted toward the light. It was a small clearing in the woods, a moment of calm in the chaos. She couldn't see anyone but the light. It was a beacon. She pushed through the trees toward it. The clearing was small but open, and as she entered, she spotted a parked car at the far end. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She rushed toward the car, her fingers trembling as she fumbled for the door handle. It was locked. "Come on," she whispered desperately, glancing over her shoulder. The killer's voice was faint but still there, and his footsteps were growing louder. Just as she was about to give up, the door unlocked with a click. She threw it open and slid inside, slamming the door behind her. The engine roared to life, and she sped off into the night, the distant sounds of the killer's shouts fading behind her. Rachel's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her body still shaking from the fear that had gripped her since the beginning of the night. The car's headlights illuminated the road ahead, but the world around her felt far too quiet. She didn't know where she was headed, but she knew she had to keep driving, keep moving. As the trees thinned out, Rachel's eyes scanned the dark roads, her thoughts a swirl of panic and exhaustion. She had escaped, but the danger wasn't over. She could feel it, lurking just behind her. She had survived tonight, but for how long? With a glance over her shoulder, she drove faster, the night stretching before her, filled with uncertainty and fear. The killer was still out there, and she knew that the fight for her life wasn't over. Rachel's hands were slick with sweat as she gripped the steering wheel, her eyes flickering to the rearview mirror every few seconds. The road stretched on before her, an endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the darkened landscape. She couldn't shake the feeling that the killer was still following her, lurking just behind her, waiting. Her pulse thudded in her ears as she took another sharp turn, trying to lose herself in the twisting streets. The car's headlights cut through the darkness, but the night was suffocating, every shadow feeling like a threat. Just keep going, she whispered to herself. She had to make it. But then, a strange thought crept into her mind. What if he wasn't just following her? What if he was waiting for her to make a mistake? A sharp turn ahead brought her back to the present, and her hands tightened around the wheel as she steered the car around it. Rachel's mind raced as she continued down the road, the tension never leaving her body. She kept thinking about what the killer had said, that she couldn't escape him. The words echoed in her mind, and with every passing mile, the feeling of dread only deepened. Her thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of a car engine. Her heart skipped a beat. It was him. He had found her again. Rachel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. She didn't know how much longer she could keep going. She risked a quick glance in the rearview mirror, and there it was, the flashing headlights of a car, much too close for comfort. "No," she whispered. "Not again." Her heart raced as she pressed the accelerator, pushing the car faster. There was nowhere left to hide. She had to face him now. The car behind her grew closer with every passing second. The headlights reflected in her mirrors, blinding her as she pushed the pedal to the metal. Rachel could hear the engine roaring behind her, but the road ahead seemed to stretch into infinity. The sound of the killer's car filled her ears, and her stomach churned. He was relentless, his pursuit never ceasing. It was like he was always one step behind her, never letting up. Suddenly, the road ahead split into two. One path seemed familiar, leading to the edge of a small town, while the other plunged into the forest. Rachel's mind raced. She could take the town road. Maybe there were people there who could help. Or she could try the forest, where she might be able to lose him for good. Her heart pounding, Rachel veered toward the forest. She had no time to think about it. This was her only shot. Rachel's car swerved off the paved road and onto the narrow dirt path leading into the forest. The tires gripped the uneven surface, kicking up dust and gravel behind her. The air felt thick, heavy with anticipation. Behind her, the killer's car followed without hesitation, its headlights cutting through the trees like a predator hunting its prey. Rachel's pulse quickened as the trees closed in around her, the dark shapes seeming to press in on all sides. She couldn't see much, but she knew the killer was close. She could feel his presence. Her headlights barely pierced the darkened woods, and the sound of the engine in the distance echoed eerily. She had to find somewhere to hide. Fast. She spotted a narrow gap between two trees ahead, a tight fit, but it was her best chance. She jerked the steering wheel to the left, hoping the killer wouldn't be able to follow. Rachel's heart raced as she maneuvered through the trees, her hands shaking as she gripped the wheel. The gap between the trees was just wide enough to fit the car, and she pushed forward with everything she had. The tires scraped against the bark as the car squeezed through, but it fit. She had to get deeper into the forest. She kept her foot heavy on the gas, the engine roaring as she plunged further into the darkness. But her relief was short-lived. The killer's car crashed through the gap after her, not even slowing down. He was relentless, every inch of him determined to capture her. Rachel's mind raced. She had to get away. She had to find somewhere to hide. Suddenly she saw it, a small abandoned cabin off to the side of the road. Her eyes locked on it. It was her only chance. Rachel's tires screeched as she pulled the car into the clearing near the cabin. She didn't waste a second. Throwing the car into park, she bolted out of the driver's seat and sprinted toward the cabin. Behind her, the killer's car skidded to a stop, the engine growling ominously as the man stepped out. He wasn't far behind. Rachel ran toward the cabin's broken door, her breath coming in short bursts. She slammed it open, her feet pounding on the floor as she moved deeper inside. The door behind her slammed open, and she could hear the killer's footsteps following her inside, but she wasn't going to stop. She spotted a small closet to the left, an old wooden wardrobe, and she dove inside, praying that the darkness would shield her. Her breath caught as she heard him moving through the cabin, his footsteps slow and deliberate. The silence was suffocating, and Rachel's heart pounded in her ears. The killer was close. Too close.